Continuing, it says, but really there was a lot more than just that going on. Back in 1972, the Biological Weapon Convention Treaty had made germ weapons illegal, and all three countries had pledged to renounce biological warfare. But recently, American intelligence officers had discovered that the Soviets had not given up bioweapons work, and instead had created a far more nefarious and frightening program that any military scientist in the Western world had imagined. This information was first learned 2 years earlier, in October 1989, and the Americans and the British had been puzzling out what to do about it ever since. This trilateral mission was a piece of that puzzle. In December 1991, the Soviets did not know that Americans and British intelligence officers were aware of their covert bioweapons program, which was called Biopreparat. Biopreparat. Nor did the Soviets realize that American intelligence officers knew that the mysterious Dr. Kanatchin Alabikov was deputy director of Biopreparat, meaning he was second in command of a program that involved roughly 40,000 employees working in 40 facilities, 12 of which were used solely for offensive biological weapons work. That the Soviet delegation was in the United States at all was a highly sensitive issue. Secretary of Defense Cheney. Now, do you understand who that is? Let's go all the way back then. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney did not want the details made public and to ensure secrecy. And Salakia, not to digress, but and just like with the embassy with Russia and America, I forgot who was the president at the time or the Secretary of Defense. It was somebody that is actually in Washington today that was like basically aware of what was going on. And to ensure secrecy, his office issued a press blackout around the mission. The only people outside the Defense Department cleared on the Soviet scientists' whereabouts were individuals with the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, who served as escorts. The group traveled to Dungway Proving Grounds in Utah, where deadly pathogens had once been tested in the open air, but whose Cold War era buildings had since been abandoned. They traveled to Pine Bluffs Arsenal in Arkansas, where the United States had once manufactured biological weapons on an industrial scale, but where there was now nothing left but weedy fields and rusting railroad tracks. They went to Fort Detrick. They went to Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, the former locus of U.S. bioweapons research and development, where U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases now had its headquarters. Years later, Dr. Alabikov would write a memoir, and in it he described the 1991 trip as one of which he was less interested in what he saw at the former weapons facilities than in the lifestyle of abundance that so many Americans seem to enjoy. He regarded with wonderment the well-paved highways, the well-stocked stores, and the luxurious homes where ordinary Americans live. Democracy, he concluded, offered more to its citizens than communism ever did. The trip to America in 1991 was Dr. Alabikov's first. He spoke not a word of English and had just met 13 Westerners in his lifetime, all members of this same trilateral mission who had visited the Soviet Union earlier that same year. Let me skip around because I'm assuming this guy I'm gonna continue where I was because I guess we getting in. I might have to do this, make this a series because it is a lot of pages to it, and like this is all through the spirit, So I didn't have really any precepts. Yeah, it's like 20 pages. Continue. It says the Soviets were producing germ weapons, and it was Alabikov's job to make sure that the Western scientists were steered clear of any sites that might belie the Soviets' illegal weapons work. Born in Kazakhstan in 1950, Alabikov had trained as an infectious disease physician, specializing in microbiology and epidemiology. At the age of 24, he joined the military faculty at the Tomsky Medical Institute in Siberia and began working inside what he later described as a succession of secret laboratories and installations in some of the most remote corners of the Soviet Union. With each job came financial privilege, which was unusual for a non-Russian. Kazakhs were generally considered second-class citizens during the Cold War, but Alabikov was a talented microbiologist and a hard worker, which served him well and paid off. By the 1990s, with the combined salary of a senior bureaucrat and high-ranking military officer, he wrote, "I earned as much as a Soviet government minister." As the tour of American facilities was taking place, Russia was in a state of pandemonium. The Berlin Wall had come down 2 years earlier, but the red flag of the Soviet Union still flew over the Kremlin. The geopolitical landscape between the superpowers was in flux. It wasn't so clear the Soviet leaders weren't going to reform. Remembers Dr. Craig Fields, DARPA's director at the time. There was a lot of anxiety about the fact that they might reform. The two nations had been moving toward normalized relations, but for the Pentagon, this was at a time of great instability. While the world rejoiced over the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Defense Department had been coping with a myriad of national security unknowns. Would a unified Germany join NATO? How to handle troop reductions throughout Europe? What about all the nuclear weapons the Soviets possessed? The Soviet Union has spent the past 5 decades building up its weapons of mass destruction in a shoulder-to-shoulder arms race with the United States. Who now would control the Soviets' arsenal of WMDs, or weapons of mass destruction? At any given moment, the Russians had more than 11,000 nuclear warheads aimed at carefully selected targets inside the United States, as well as an additional 15,000 nuclear warheads stored in facilities across the sprawling Russian countryside, including mobile systems fitted onto railroad cars. Never knew that. And the thing is, what he named like 25,000, 26,000 nuclear warheads, but the nuclear warheads, just because you got a nuclear warhead, it might be 10 actual bombs inside the nuclear warhead. So that one becomes like 12. That's why it says 200 million or 200,000, which is 200 million. It says basically 200 million missiles gonna hit this place. One person uniquely familiar with these kinds of questions, numbers, and threats was Lisa Bronson, the Pentagon's official leading the delegation of Soviet scientists on their tour. Still in her 30s, Bronson was a lawyer and a disarmament expert. As deputy director for multilateral negotiations with the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Bronson had helped conceive and design the visit by the Soviet team. She had also accompanied the U.S. and British scientists on their tour around Soviet facilities earlier in the year. She was one of the 13 Westerners Dr. Alabikov had met before this trip. Now, with the facilities visited and the mission coming to a close, Lisa Bronson took the Russian scientists on a walking tour of the nation's capital. It was during this part of the trip that the fortuitous exchange of words between Dr. Alabikov and Lisa Bronson occurred. Alabikov recalled the conversation in his memoirs. At various stops along the way, she had challenged us about the Soviet biological weapons program, he wrote. Naturally, we denied we had one, but I admired her persistence. Standing on Pennsylvania Avenue, just down the road from the White House, one of Alabikov's colleagues asked Bronson how much money American scientists could earn in a year. That depends on the experience, she answered. A government scientist can make between $50,000 and $70,000, but a scientist in the private sector could earn up to $200,000 a year, about $350,000 in 2015. About $350,000 in 2015. Alabikov was astonished. Throughout the trip, he remained impressed by how much better everything was in America, from public infrastructure to personal living conditions. He thought of his own life in Moscow, how hard he worked, how little he had to show for it in comparison, and most of all, how grim the future looked now that the wall was down. And at the end of the day, that's just the spirit, because it just proves what I brought up before, how that these fucking Edomites, because at the end of the day, these Russians are Edomites as well. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, just showing you how carnal they were. You know what I mean? He basically traded on the country that he was from, because you can already read where this going. I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that he traded on the country he was, basically a member of, with no hesitation, all for filthy lucre. And there's a lot of scriptures about the love of money. I got one. Bear with me for a second. I got a scripture because, like I said, it keep on constantly telling you how, he was thinking about his life and how Americans live so well, and how he struggled. And that's the typical Edomite. This is Romans 8, and I'm gonna start at verse 4. I'm gonna start at verse 3. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, Yahweh sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Verse 5, for they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. Verse 6, for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. And at the end of the day, this man more than likely created basically weapons of death for for carnal means, for money, to live better. And ultimately, like when you enough in the spirit and you've been doing this thing enough, you're gonna realize all things been to the will of the Most High. I believe it's a scripture in Apocrypha that says something roughly, I'm paraphrasing, but roughly it sounds similar to that. I would have to look it up. But at the end of the day, this man trusted in riches. You know what I mean? It tells you in scripture that money is the root of all evil. You know what I mean? Let me get that. 1 Timothy 6, I believe it's 6 and 10. For the love of money. Now, it doesn't say money is the root. It says for the love of money. And that man clearly loved money to create a weapon. That's not like a gun or a sword. You know what I mean? Like, these biological weapons do mass killing. You know what I mean? And best believe somebody got to be held accountable for that. Like King David. King David had so much blood on his hands, he wasn't even allowed to touch something that was holy, which was the temple. He couldn't even build it in his lifetime. It had to be built in Solomon's lifetime. Showing you the power of the Lord. Because he was killing in the Lord's name for the Lord, but yet still, Lord code. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And at the end of the day, you got people that covered after. And that's why, like I said, 9 times out of 10, this man created and basically, what's that word? Mutinied on his country, changed sides to make money in America. And rightly so. I mean, all these scriptures are popping up in my head because, you got a lot of people that fornicate with this whore, which is Babylon the Great, aka America, But at the end of the day, not just like that, that Russian or other people. You got a lot of people that's going to trust in their riches in that day. But it tells you in a day of wrath, silver and gold cannot deliver you, Bear with me for a second. I believe I got the wrong one. It's Proverbs, I believe. Slovakia. I didn't mean for this to go that long. I think it's 11 to 28. That's the spirit, because it says Proverbs 11 and 4. Riches profit not in the day of wrath, but righteousness deliver from death. And then it says, verse 28. Skipping to verse 28. He that trusteth in his riches shall fall, but the righteous shall flourish as a branch. So at the end of the day, not just this carnal man that created, like I said, ultimately when you got the insight and you got the spiritual eye open, you can see, this man was used by Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua for his will, but, at the same time, money was his motivator. I'm going to finish this out though. It says, at the time he wrote, a top-level Russian scientist could make about $100 a month. They talking about hundreds of thousands, right? Emboldened, Alabikov decided to speak up. Through an interpreter, he asked Bronson a question of his own. With my experience, can I find a job here? He asked. Bronson gently told Dr. Alabikov that he would have to learn English first. Through the translator, Alabikov thanked his Pentagon host. Then he made a joke. Okay, he said, if I ever come here, I'll ask for your help. Lisa Bronson just smiled. Everyone started to laugh. Alabikov recalled, including me. So that's just, like I said, you can clearly read that. Like, that dude, and that's probably where they got a lot of, like, when you think of Terminator Judgment Day, and they had that Jake, that was the guy that came up with all the designs off the old Terminator model off the hand and the chip. He came up with all the ideas, I can't think of his name. But, this guy probably, we're going to get into it, though. I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to do one more video. Salakia, bear with me.